Get your Prot Warrior out of the closet because it has just been reworked in the 11.2 patch and we have tested it. Hello there, welcome back to Marcelian&Flame. We will be talking about all of the changes that Prot Warrior has undergone so far on the PTR. A lot of them good, a couple of them probably terrible, and we are very curious as to know what you think because we need to talk about this stuff so that the devs hopefully hear about our feedback and criticism so we can finally have the Prot Warrior that we have always wanted. So let's start it off first of all with the baseline stuff that has changed that you might be interested in. First of all, challenging shout is now baseline, no longer in the talent tree, so you don't have to spend talent points to actually get it, which is great because it has been a cornerstone of Prot Warrior, particularly in Season 2, and it has made it difficult to get the disrupting shout talent that would make it silence all the mobs around you, which now you have, for all intents and purposes, one extra talent point to use for that instead of having to put it into the baseline challenging shout ability. And before we actually go into all of the other talents, the good and the bad, I do have to mention two things. One, if you take a look at the talent tree right now, you can see that a lot of the things have shifted their position around the talent tree. This is normal when a rework or big changes are happening to the talents. And it could also be not the final version of the talent tree, but this is the one that we have right now, and this is the one that we're going to be talking about. The second part would be that a lot of the power from certain talents have been shifted to other nodes as well. So if you look at some of them like shield specialization, that's only in 1 point now, you will notice that it gives you less block chance and less block value. But we have other things to potentially compensate for it that kind of make it maybe a good choice nonetheless. Quickly going through some of the bigger ones that you might notice is now we have a talent called Armor Specialization that gives you 6% flat out armor. Not too bad, but it is at the very start of the talent tree as an opposition to Fight Through the Flames, which is something that we've been having so far, but hardly ever talented into since it was a little bit expensive. Defensive stance additionally reduces the magic damage that you take by 4%. And now that we're talking about magic damage, let's talk about the big elephant in the room that it's no longer in the room because it has been removed, and that is spell block. Does that make you happy? The devs' reason for removing spell block is that it required a lot of knowledge for the player to know exactly what spells can be blocked and when you should be using this as opposed to any other part of your cooldown kit. Although that is indeed fair, that same argument can be applied to Spell Reflect, to Feign Death, to Cloak of Shadows, to probably every class that has one cooldown that is similar to spell block. So this is not a good justification for removing it. It was a reason why Prot Warrior was able to deal with magic damage intake, and it being taken away doesn't change anything because the problem that Prot Warrior was facing, which is consistent magic damage taken for a particularly long amount of time, hasn't been resolved yet. So I don't know how we're gonna be doing with this, but it's gone, and in its place we have two talents that are as a choice node. Spellbreaker gives you a 4% chance to disrupt magic damage dealt to you and negate 100% of it. What this means in simpler terms is you have a 4% magic damage reduction, but it is RNG. It's not passive or baseline like what another talent will give you later on, which we're going to check as well. Tying survivability to RNG has never been a good thing unless it was something like parry, and you could only really take advantage of it if you're fighting a large number of mobs where your chances of proccing a particular thing would even out over the course of a long fight encounter. This is not the same thing because the problem with Prot Warrior magic damage wasn't just consistent magic damage taken over the course of a dungeon. No, it was with specific moments in the encounter where you would just be pelted by large amounts of magic damage. So this does not replace spell block. Hunker Down, which is the choice node, also doesn't replace spell block because what this does is the damage you take from area of effect attacks is reduced by 2%, giving you, similar to Spellbreaker, over the course of a long encounter, 2% avoidance for all intents and purposes. Great, but also not what spell block was being used for. It also additionally makes spell reflection reduce magic damage taken by an additional 10%. This could potentially replace spell block if spell reflect would be a second button to press so you have enough cooldowns to cover all of the issues that you would have as Prot Warrior, and last for way longer than Spell Reflect would already last for. Neither of which is it accomplishing at this moment. So neither of these two talents replace Spell Block, and they solve a different problem than what Spell Block was solving, in my honest opinion. But maybe I'm wrong. Please let me know in the comment section down below. You might be a much more knowledgeable Prot Warrior than I am. One thing that might not be a great change would be the position of last stand at this moment in the left side of the talent tree. Now, first of all, although this might sound great as a defensive for somebody that's new to Prot Warrior because it gives you a chunk of HP, in terms of the value as a defensive, this is a terrible cooldown. It has always been a terrible cooldown for at least 5, 6, maybe 7 years, and it has only really been good when it had a modifier to its cooldown that was not expensive to get. Modifier like Bolster, which has been almost useless for the last 3 to 4 years because you don't need the added value of Bolster. You get the added value of Shield Block from talents like Shield Charge that are way better to use. And you're always going to be using talents like Enduring Defense, which is now in the middle part of the talent tree, increasing the Shield Block duration by 1 and then 2 seconds for the second point. And if you really need more Shield Block uptime, you would always get Heavy Repercussions to add to it. Shield Block, as opposed to Spell Block, is the type of mitigation that you want to have for a long period of time and not just in particular increments. Bolster is a particular increment buff of Shield Block uptime that you don't really need. The only other value for this would be is if you had large gaps in your Shield Block uptime, so you would use Last Stand to compensate for that, which is what Last Stand was useful for last time it was a part of your core kit. And I think that was probably in Battle for Azeroth, maybe early Shadowlands, before Reprisal was added. And you would need 2 talent points for that, supposedly saving you the talent points you would need to spend on Enduring Defense or Heavy Repercussions, which you're not going to do, because Enduring Defense would be something that you would need for Shield Specialization 100%, but also for Indomitable if you chose to go that route, since there's no other way to get these two without getting Enduring Defense, which is counterintuitive to you getting Bolster, making Bolster more or less useless. And if you still need uptime, you're not going to get Bolster, which is 2 talent points to spend when you can just get 1 talent point in Heavy Repercussions or even Into the Fray that accomplishes the same thing on top of actually giving you more damage, which is something that Bolster does not. But Unnerving Focus might give you more damage for Last Stand, but it's also not that valuable for the talent investment that it requires, since Rage Generation is not that important for Prot Warrior as it used to be when the last time you had Unnerving Focus as a point in your kit, which was Shadowlands, because Anger Management has slightly been nerfed over the course of the last 2 expansions, and Indomitable is, for all intents and purposes, almost useless right now, since it offers such a slow amount of sustain that putting that point in Indomitable and not in Battle-Scarred Veteran, which has been the choice that people have been making in the last seasons, as far as I'm aware, it just wasn't worth it whatsoever. So if Last Stand is useless, then Thunderlord is almost never going to be picked, even though this has value, especially if you played Mountain Thane, or particularly the Mountain Thane with a new tier set that has you want to spam Thunderclap way more often. And just to kind of finish up with this part of the talent tree, Unyielding Stance will be now buffing your defensive stance to increase the damage reduction that you additionally gain by 4%. Considering that you have Shield Specialization being nerfed, where my block chance is lowered by 4% on the PTR than on live with the same amount of gear and same amount of talents, this is compensating for that and probably adding more value to it because this would affect magic damage as well, and is something that you cannot skip. And now let's get to the good part, what my favorite change of the Prot rework is, and something that will add more value to your playstyle, and that is the Execute talent. We have the first one here, Red Right Hand, which increases the execute damage by 15%. 15% is not a magical number that will magically make Execute into a magical spell, but it does give the devs an easy node to use to tune Execute if they ever want Execute to perform a little bit better, hopefully enough where Prot Warrior can actually use it, because this is not the only talent around Execute that we have, but we also have Heavy Handed lower down the talent tree. Execute hits up to 2 additional targets for 70% of the damage. This is incredible. In Mythic Plus, at the very least, this will give you an actual Execute phase to make you feel like an actual warrior, where you will be dealing quite a lot of damage on targets that are closing in on dying. Of course, this can have value in raids as well whenever you're fighting council fights or bosses with ads, where you can use ads to maybe snipe some Executes on the big target. This will offer you some choices in your rotation when you have to decide whether or not you're going to be spending your rage on Revenge or Ignore Pain or on Execute, assuming that you're always going to be spending on Shield Block, because otherwise, good luck. And to kind of capitalize on this, Massacre is on the left-hand side of the talent tree and is a little bit harder to get when all of the Execute talents are here. I don't know what that would mean for the actual build, but it does work wonders if you play Mountain Thane. At least I did. With all the execute talents, I was significantly squishier, but I was doing a lot of damage. And last but not least, Whirling Blade is a choice node capstone with Ravager that replaced the old, I believe it was Hurricane that we had that nobody ever used because it was terrible. Whirling Blade is functionally better than Ravager, and it is passive. It's better in the sense that it has overall more uptime and overall more damage, and it doesn't cost a global cooldown to use. The added benefit is that it makes the rotation slightly simpler since you have one fewer button to use, but you won't be able to control when it procs. And if you want to use Ravager when you also have Avatar, when you have Demoralizing Shout, when you maybe even have a potion in for more burst damage, you won't be able to do that. So having the trade-off of this talent node is actually really good and what these passive replacements for abilities should do. This is a good start for the Prot Warrior rework and not actually what would solve all of the issues for Prot Warrior, so I'm hoping that more changes will come into the future that we will keep you informed on. And until then, make sure to check the Shadow Priest rework, the 17th Shadow Priest rework, it seems, because it's actually kind of good and Shadow Priest is looking like a good DPS next patch. So if you were itching for that big dam, Shadow Priest might be your jam.